Good evening. I want to start by telling you a story. It's a story about a woman. She was living the American dream, or so she thought. She was an upper middle class stay at home mom. She had two children, and her husband made really good money. Until one day, her world got turned upside down. It was like the rug of her life was pulled from under her. On one November morning, she found herself being arrested in front of her two girls and having to spend 24 hours in jail. After being released, she discovered she could not return to the only home she ever knew. She could not see her 6-year-old child that she cared for from the time that she was born. The bank accounts were emptied, and now she was homeless and penniless in a town with no family. Now, this woman had to fight for almost 2 years with no resources for the custody of her child, for her dignity, and her life back. Everyone had counted her for down and out, but she decided that this was not going to be the end of her story. So at the age of 42, this woman enrolled herself in college for the first time. A year later, she wrote a book. A year after that, she founded a nonprofit organization to help women like herself who had been victims of abuse. She joined local organizations to fight for those like herself and other marginalized groups. And she continues this fight today. That woman is me. I am Marjorie Phoenix. I want to welcome you all to Phoenix Rising Stories. Now, this is not your ordinary storytelling event. This is a space where you will hear how others like myself rose from the ashes of their life. I chose to rename my last name Phoenix. You know, the mythical story of the bird, and it tells us about this bird that knew that it was going to die. And in order for it to live, it had to take this long journey and go through this rebirthing process. Haven't we all had those experiences at one or more times in our lives? It's the journey of life. So we are all phoenixes. And as I came in contact with more and more people that had stories of overcoming adversity, I realized that writing my book, starting my nonprofit, and my business had nothing to do with me, but about others. The stories and experiences of others that help shape history. Now, I know we don't see it that way when we're in it or a part of it, but for someone like me that's a visionary and a big picture person, I see how we are all connected through our shared experiences. And you know what is the most important part of storytelling? It's the wisdom, the nuggets, and the lessons that we glean from them. For me, it's that Phoenix moment, that defining moment when you say, not today, devil, not today. It's when you decide that what is happening to you is actually happening for you and for others. How do we take our lived experiences, use it as a platform along with our voice to make a difference in our communities, in society, in the world? That is what we're going to unpack tonight with these 6 extraordinary guests that I have. Now, I'll have you know that I have interviewed hundreds of people over the past 10 years. I've heard many stories, and I work to find ways for those stories to be expressed, whether it's through platforms like this or through creative expression, to help you use your story and your voice to make a difference. But these 6 people I chose because there was something special about them, something rich in their stories. And it was actually more than their stories. It was their history of who they were before their experience and the work that they're doing now in the world because of it. Now, we're only going to be able to like hit the tip of the iceberg with our guests tonight. They all need their own hour of time. But what we will do is plan to deliver some applications for you all to take with you to begin to see how you can use your story to create change in the world. So before I begin, I want to let you guys know that we will have a little bit of time for Q&A for the panelists. So feel free to plug in your questions that you might have in the chat box. And if you have a question for one of the specific guests, just put their names in front of the question so we'll know how to direct that. Francisco, he's behind the scenes. He's our technical producer. He's going to be capturing as many questions and comments as he can. And also, I want you to feel free to share on social media using the hashtag Phoenix Rising Stories. And just share on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram and invite your friends into the conversation. Also, we do have a program for the event. And you should have all received that in an email as part of an attachment. And if not, we'll make sure and get that link to you so you can download it to follow along. Before we begin, I have a special thank you for our event sponsor, Jamar Jennings. If you are interested to know and how you can save on having solar, contact Jamar at 215-791-2442. And we'll put his information in the chat for you as well. So I want to go ahead and kick off our conversation with our first guest. Now we are starting off hot off the fire with this woman and her story. Some of you may have actually seen her story in the news a few years ago. Alyssa Hogan. Alyssa went from being a preschool teacher, a mother and a wife, to being an accused murderer for stabbing her then husband in a fight. The jury found her not guilty because she was defending herself after 9 years of abuse. She was able to rise from the ashes of this situation to now be the founder, principal consultant, and lead trainer of Alyssa A. Hogan Enterprises, where she provides one-on-one small business, leadership coaching, and training. Now, Alyssa, I'm not sure, I was thinking about your story and there's so many layers to it about where to really begin. But I really want to talk to you about the effects of incarceration. Listen, I was in jail for 24 hours. And just within that 24-hour time, I was about to lose my mind. It was a lot for me. But I also knew that I was going to be released. For you, your freedom was hanging by a thread and was going to have to be decided by a jury of your peers. Tell us about the effects that time being incarcerated had on you and the uncertainty about your future.
Alyssa dropped off, Marjorie.
Oh, okay. Well, we will just move on to our next guest then until she comes back, right? Or do we want to? Oh, there she is. She's coming on now. This happens.
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Happening. Yes, everything's happening today.
Not a problem. Now, did you get to hear my first question for you?
No.
Okay.
I heard your story, and I thought you were actually talking about me, and I was like, confused.
Isn't that something? All right. So, basically, I was saying, you spent some time in jail. And, for me, I spent 24 hours. And it was a lot just for me, mentally, emotionally. But I knew that I was going to be released. For you, you had no idea what was going to happen next. So, tell us about the effect that time had on you and the uncertainty of your future.
Well, when I would describe my time in, it's like 30 days, 30 nights. When you read the story of Jesus going into the mountains, And those 30 days were like a awakening period for me. So it wasn't actually trauma being in there. I felt as though I deserved to be there. So I liked being away from everybody. I was away from the reality, and I was in there in my own safe space. So I felt safe, secluded, isolated. Um, yeah, so it wasn't trauma to me. My reason for being in there was the trauma. So I had time to escape it for 30 days by focusing on other people's problems.
That is interesting. And it's so funny you say that because I know for me in that 24 hours while I was in there, and I write about this in my book, um, I met a lot of women who were also there because of some sort of altercation with men, right? And it was through those little bit of conversations that I had, I knew and I realized that night that God was going to do something with my situation. I didn't know what and I didn't know how, but I knew that was going to happen. So it was traumatizing for me, but for you, you saw it as a time that you were sort of self-reflecting and then you focused on others. So by the time as you were released, did you have a plan of action about your life, about what the next step was going to be?
Actually, no. Um, Being released was, I had mixed feelings. I didn't know if I was ready to be released. And right before I was going home, I thought I was going home to hug my children. And I found out from my uncle on a phone call right before I was supposed to be released that the judge had put a no contact order. I had 3 children, they were my life. So you're thinking getting out, and my only reason for wanting to be out was to be around them. But I realized that I'm not going back to the same bed that I slept in prior to being put in there. And everything outside had changed. So it was like those 30 days, my life stood still. And then I had to go back out and deal with where I had just left during that period. It's so funny because yours was in November, so mine happened in November.
Wow. 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 Now that for me, even more like, I had no idea once I was released from jail what was going to happen next. Like I thought, okay, I could go back home. I could, or I could go see my child. And I had no idea that, it was going to get worse. And I think for me, the traumatic thing was not seeing my child, my 6-year-old child, not being
Yes.
able to be with my child. So when you're in a situation like that, it is hard to make plans because you don't know minute by minute what's the next thing is going to happen. Life is so uncertain. So tell us about, um, your faith, how much your faith played a role in, moving forward through that.
Oh my God. Actually, if I have to be honest, right before I went in, I had completely lost faith. I
Mm,
had told God, listen, um, I did what you said, I'm married. I was faithful. I pray. I go to church every Sunday. Our first date was in the church. So we were there every Sunday, but my prayers felt unanswered. It was like my marriage got worse, my life got worse. And now here I was being told that I was being booked for murder and that my husband was gone, the person that I loved. I mean, I loved him even though our relationship was a roller coaster. It was toxic, and I did not rebuild my relationship with God until that day I found out in the station that I was. They told me because I didn't know he was deceased. They told me that my ex-husband was dead, and I just fell on the floor and just felt like I couldn't breathe. And I started talking to him. I was like, why would you allow, I'm a good person. I'm a teacher. You know, I dedicate my time. I'm a good mom. I was a good wife. How could you allow this to happen to me?
Mhm.
And that was my first time I could hear him clearly speaking to me and saying, I never left you. I've been
Mhm.
here the entire time. But because you were so wrapped up in everything that was going on in your life, you couldn't hear me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, wow. So tell us then now, as time goes on and you know that you have to pick up the pieces of your life, what was that defining moment for you that you realized, okay, I'm going to have to rise out of this. I cannot stay here. I have to move forward. What was that for you?
I don't think it was like a specific moment. It was like pieces of the puzzle um, that were being put together. So every day was a moment of, oh my God, I'm waking up. It's not a dream. I'm waking up to a nightmare is what I felt. And sleeping 2 hours. And so it was that moment of, okay, I haven't lost my mind. I'm still here. I was checking to make sure I wasn't crazy that day. So every day there was something I was learning, some lesson. People were still actually calling me, family and friends, asking me for advice while I was pending trial.
Mhm. I think we lost Elisa. Okay, I think we lost Elisa. We lost the connection. So we will try to bring her in at some point. Is this her coming back? Okay, let's go ahead and we're gonna drop her right now, and then we'll come back to her once we get a chance, and we'll move on to our next guest. All right, so this next guest is someone that I just connected with this year. And right away, we connected on this level. And it wasn't just because of our stories, but because our paths that we took because of our story, it looked almost the same. We had the shared passion for social justice, for criminal justice reform, and for research. And I'm excited. I am so excited about her upcoming book, A Trooper in More Ways Than You Know. So in 2006, Demi found herself a victim of teen dating violence. While she was swayed by his good looks and charm, she completely looked past that they were all early warning signs of domestic violence. And after getting out of that relationship in 2012, Demi found herself a victim of domestic violence again. And in 2015, she finally decided to leave the relationship that almost killed her. Last year, Demi began pursuing a doctorate degree with a focus on conducting research on both domestic violence as well as issues with criminal justice and justice reform. Demi, are you there?
I'm here.
Great. I am so glad you could come on. Listen, so I'm going to have to give you some more time when your book comes out so everyone could really hear your story in depth. But when I think about Demi's story, I think about the word resilience because she has so much strength. And as you can see, she is a strong woman physically, but she is also a strong woman spiritually and mentally. And I want to talk to you about that strength. I want to ask you, where did that will to fight come from? Was it something that you feel that was inherent to you, or it's something that sort of kicked in out of a need for survival?
I think, well, growing up, it was always instilled in me from my parents that, to never give up and anything that I wanted to achieve, I could. But when I really think about it relating to the domestic violence story, more so the second one, I remember thinking if I don't survive, like the only alternative to getting out of this is he's going to kill me. Like there
Mm,
was no other way out. And in the beginning, I tried to ignore that. But as time went on, I mean, we were both in law enforcement, so we had multiple guns in the house. And research shows you that if domestic violence victims, if there is guns in the house, the statistics show that the victim's chances of being killed are 500% higher than if you don't have guns in the house. And like I said, we had multiple. So I really think my will and that to fight back was just to survive. I had to get out. And if I didn't get out, somebody was going to end up dead, whether it was going to be me or him. It got to the point where it was one or the other.
So tell us a little bit, if you can, about that moment, that defining moment for you where you decided, okay, enough of this and I'm fighting back.
So I specifically remember the last time that he had put his hands on me. He had come home late and I was getting ready for work. And every morning, pretty much every morning, I would say I would wake up to either a fight or to the loaded gun that he would sleep with under his pillow pointed in my face. So I would wake up looking down the barrel of a gun, and he would say, you know, I can kill you and this and things like that. But the last and the final moment was when he and a friend were at our house, and he got home, like I said, late, and he picked me up by my neck and was choking me and slamming me against the wall. And as he was choking me, he just kept slamming my head into the wall and then put me down and punched me. And I remember thinking in that moment, if he had punched me and I was a little further down the hall where I could have got to my gun, I know I would have shot and killed him that night. And when I really started to think, like, have those thoughts, I knew, okay, this isn't normal. Like, I can't think like that. That's not me. But that was the moment that I thought, this is going to be my only way out, is if I kill him.
Wow, that it would have to come to that.
Because I couldn't just leave. And I had tried numerous times before just to leave. And then it was always, we can talk about it. And, you know, people always say, like, why do you stay so long? But you have to understand, in that situation, I couldn't just up and leave. Like, that wasn't an opportunity for me at that time.
Yeah. A lot of people ask that question about why don't they just leave? And it really is, like you said, one of the most dangerous times for a victim to leave. They have to put a plan together, and you can't. Yeah, it can become very, very volatile at that time. So, yes. So, you know, and we talked about, you know, your life afterwards and, you know, all the stuff that you're doing now. But let's talk about how you were able to sort of balance your emotions and trying to, and your mental state with that situation, and trying to pick up the pieces of your life at the same time. What does that look like?
So I remember thinking, like you said, when I said I couldn't just leave. So I had to really think in my mind and strategically plan my exit. But at the same time, I had to make him think like I'm still trying to make this work, because if not, my plan's gonna fail. But mentally, I remember thinking, like, I don't want to say I was depressed, but I think I was more shocked and embarrassed because I didn't grow up in a home where domestic violence happened. So not that it was new to me because of what I experienced in 2006, but this was 1,000 times worse. Like, I had never experienced it to this level. So I kept thinking, like, is it me? What's wrong with me? And then I would think, no, it's not, like, it's him. But I remember just trying to put all the pieces together to think, like, I have to survive because I have so much more that I still want to do, but I don't know how to pick up the pieces to move forward.
How long would you say that it took you, you know, from one beginning stage to, I won't say the end, but that moment where you felt strong enough that you could do it?
So you mean as far as leaving, or as far as like leaving?
Yeah.
Oh, far as leaving, it was that night, and I remember the night specifically. January 23rd, 2015 was the night that the last like domestic abuse happened. And then January 25th, I remember he was out and I had called my parents and I was like, I need help, like, because I didn't fully disclose everything to them. But I remember thinking, like, somebody needs to come and help me pack him up while he's out, because if I stay one more night, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow.
So you were hiding.
Oh, absolutely. Because we were engaged too. So on the outside, I had this beautiful diamond to show off to people. We looked like the perfect couple. Both were into fitness. So I hid everything first, but you can only hide so much.
What did you learn about yourself in this experience, Demi?
I honestly learned how strong I was, because I remember thinking I wasn't strong and that I had to be weak to be in this situation. But then I look back and I think, you know, you really survived. Like, what could have killed you? Like, there were so many things. Like, he tried to light me on fire. He came after me with a butcher knife. He would sleep with the loaded gun. So there were so many times I had just escaped death. And I think it was really, I had to tap into my own strength and think, like, this isn't where your story is going to end. Like, it might be tough for some time, but your story is not ending here.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, it's something that mentally clicks inside of us, that we're like, not today. This is
right.
Not,
absolutely.
yeah, this is not the end of my story. And you know that there was work to be done. So tell us a little bit about why you decide to do the type of work that you're doing now. You're pursuing your doctorate degree. You know, you're going into research. What do you hope to accomplish in doing this?
For the domestic violence, with sharing my story, I always think if I can help one person, because for so long I didn't talk about it. And last year was the first time I actually publicly spoke about it for the first time. And I thought to myself, if I don't share this story, there could be somebody just like me that, you know, comes from a good family, has a great job, has a great education, but this is still happening to them. And I thought, you know, if I can speak out and somebody, maybe you're not going through the same thing, but if there's a piece of my story that you can relate to, then I feel like all of that I went through was worth it. It served its purpose. I mean, I obviously not the plan that I thought I was going to take in life, but if I could help one person, then, you know, it was worth everything. As far as my research with the justice system, you and I had spoke briefly, and I won't take up too much time, but last year I suffered a brain injury as a result of being assaulted by a prisoner at work. And I was very disappointed, I guess you could say, with how my agency handled it. So that's what forced me to really start to look into the issues within our justice system and the issues that we have overall with criminal justice and everything. So for that, I don't want to, what I want people to learn, I guess, and what I want to look into is, we can't sugarcoat things anymore. I mean, we see what's going on in the world today, and that's the ones that have been filmed. What hasn't been filmed? What's been brushed under the rug that we haven't brought out and talked about? And being on the inside, I see a lot of, you know, things that the public doesn't see. And there's parts of me that can really understand why the public doesn't like us, because I know what it felt like to be addicted to the justice system, and it's not a good feeling.
Yeah. And, you know, and what I find so impressive too about what you're doing is you don't have to do it, right? None of us don't have to do any of this. But at the end of the day, who is going to pick up the mantle? Who are the ones who are going to be, you know, using their voices, protesting behind the scenes, you know, doing the research, you know, there has to be someone doing it. And you decided that this is something you were going to do. And that's why I feel like using our stories, using our voice, using our agency, using our privilege, you know, all of that, using our resources to make a difference in the lives of other people. I find that commendable. I love that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think because too, a lot of people would say, you know, do you forget that you're a cop, like, when all of this is going on? And I always tell people, like, but that doesn't define who I am. Like, I'm Demi Moore. The state police that I work for is just my career at the moment. And that's at the moment. Like, I'm still in school, so I have other things that I plan to do with my life. And what happened doesn't align with my morals and values. So I can't just sit back and be quiet anymore. Like, I can't.
Yes, yeah. So, so that is an example right there of taking your experience and using it, flipping it, using it to help others. And so we thank you so much for that, Demi.
Thank you.
Sharing your story. So stick around because we might have some questions for you at the end. At this time, let's go ahead and pop Elisa back up in, if we can, Francisco, and let's finish up with her. So sorry about that. Because we were just getting into the story.
Yeah.
So listen, so I actually just had, like, one more question for you. And we had ended it where you said that, you had sort of lost your faith, but I know you found it again. Okay.
Oh, I found it beyond found it.
Yeah. So tell us about that. Tell us how you found that again.
Well, first of all, when I was in jail, I had the first person that came up to me, because I was in isolation at first. And when I came out of isolation, I went into maximum security. And a young lady approached me, and she actually told me she was a prostitute and she wanted to give me a Bible. And I just looked at her like, a Bible ain't did nothing for me in these last few years. So, I mean, I don't know what you want me to do with it. But these women kept coming to me. And at the time, because I went back in isolation, because my story was high profile, it was on the news. I was listening to women next to me, 21-year-olds on both sides, that were preparing to go to prison, that were just going through some brokenness. And then I started, because I was in this same system. I was a child protective investigator. Then I switched over and became a social worker for over 10 years. So I was in this system where I was going in, removing kids, helping families, and going home where my house was a mess. So as I began to listen to their stories and realize that my life had been spared.
Wow.
I was so worried about, I just carried so many things, the guilt, not feeling like a strong woman. People wrote, when I got out, they wrote on Facebook, they were, writing up under my story, and they were saying, they didn't know me. And they were saying, oh, she must have did it because she was jealous. It was like women were bashing me. They were saying, well, how could she work in the school system and, and have all this going on? We never saw bruises on her. And it was like all these myths that were so not true.
Right.
You don't have to see bruises on someone for them to be abused. I would never show up in public because I had a reputation. I was a professional.
Right.
And I realized it was so many women like me. I didn't even qualify for the battered woman syndrome. They said I was too educated, and the fact that I had a job and a car, that I didn't.
Yeah. You did. It's almost as like, well, you don't qualify for any of the resources. You basically have to be dragging barefoot and, just broken.
And uneducated and everything. But they don't realize that domestic violence comes at all levels. It's not just Black women. It's not white women. It's 1 out of 3 when you walk in a room.
Yeah. And that's something that I discovered very quickly too. And one of the reasons why I started to do the work that I was doing, because women who were not physically abused, if they were emotionally, psychologically, and financially, there was no support and no resources for them. So there was nowhere for them to really go for that kind of help. So I know and I understand that. And the other thing I connect with so quickly that you just said was getting that Bible, because I remember we had Bible study that night, and the Bible that they gave me in jail, I still have that Bible. I still have that Bible today. And it's something about that moment of when you just stripped of everything and you've got nothing but God, right? At that moment.
Nothing. That's
Yeah,
exactly what it was. The
yeah,
stripping of teacher, wife,
yeah.
mother,
Yes,
nothing.
yeah.
Financially, you were equal to these women that were in there. And that's what he told me.
Exactly. Exactly. So now it becomes a journey of self discovering, self rediscovering of who you really are, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the phoenix moment. That's part of that rising from the ashes, that when you realize who you really are and your worth, and then you see that your life and what you went through, because just like me, you realize, okay, this is more than just about me. These women in here, they need somebody, right? So now you've come out of this, and you decided you're going to go out, you're going to share your testimony, you're going to start your businesses. So tell us about the work that you're doing now and why you decided to do that.
Well, my first experience of sharing my story, I didn't come out the house for probably a year after I was released because the shame, the guilt. So what I decided to do was I only went out when I was going to the therapist.
Okay.
And yeah, and somebody saw me that knew me prior to the incident, and they were just in shock. They were like, "Oh my God, you don't look like what you've been through. Can you come speak at an event?" And I was like, "You want me to speak? I don't know what I'm gonna speak about." She was like, "Just tell your story." And that's where everything began. I was so emotionally distraught after that first speaking engagement
Yeah.
because I kept and I held things back. There was still a lot of guilt. But as I began to be asked to speak more after that,
Yeah.
I began to release the chains and realize that I wasn't alone. Women
Mm.
came up to me and said, "Oh my God, how did you start this business?" Or
Yes.
"I'm inspired. I saw you
Yeah.
on TV. I prayed for you." And I was like, "Oh my God." They
Mhm.
were treating me like I was a celebrity. And I was, at that time, my car had been repoed. I was staying on my dad's futon. I didn't have a job. I started working at the labor pool. I had a master's degree making $8 an hour stocking shelves.
Wow. But you know what? They were looking at you, and you were a model of overcoming that situation. It's not about the money you were making and the car you driving, but they saw you as this overcomer in that situation. And that is it. Just the modeling of that and the way you were carrying yourself. And I'm sure that's what opened more doors for you.
It
As
is.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I thank you so much, Elisa, because when I first heard your story at Women on the Rise, and I was like, oh my gosh, there was so much, and we were supposed to get together and sit down and talk, and we never did. But when I knew I was doing this, I wanted to have you on and just sort of talk about, how you came through and what happened to you. And if you could get through that, the ordeal of that, and be here today and doing what you're doing, being a leader in the community as well. That is a perfect example right there of rising from the ashes and being able to use your voice and your story to help other women and other people in the community. So thank you again for being on with us today. And please stick around because we might have some questions for you at the end, okay?
Yeah, I have one more comment. And
Sure.
it's going to be short. I just wanted to, if anybody was listening to this, if they have any family or friends or anything that have been in a situation where they could be on pending trial or in prison currently for the similar charges to mine. My case was the first case of stand your ground, where a woman that's in a domestic violence situation is allowed to stand her ground and it be considered self-defense. And she is not guilty because I was acquitted. And so, if I don't know who this might help, but I just
Oh,
wanted to share.
thank you so much for sharing that. I had no idea. Wonderful. And if you guys want to reach out to Lisa, you can in the chat just type in her name, send her a question, and we had her on Facebook. You can find her at Elisa Hogan as well. So thanks for sharing that, Elisa.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So now we're going to move on to my next guest. Now, this is someone that I've just met recently as well. And she and I had a beautiful conversation. Fatima Omar, after 21 years in an abusive marriage, 21 years, Fatima went from government assistance to global influencer. She has such a rich history. She was born in India. Her family moved to South Africa, only to get there during the time of apartheid and having to move again to Canada. And I'm in love with Fatima's story. I know she's written several books, but the story of her life and her family's life is really what's fascinating to me. So I want to welcome her. Fatima, welcome.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. It's so great to be here.
I'm so glad to have you on. I know you have a lot going on as well, so I was really excited when you said yes. Fatima, when you and I spoke initially, you told me, you told me your story, but you told me about this defining moment when you decided to stay in Canada, even when your family went back to South Africa. I want you to tell us about that decision, what that decision was, if you could do that sort of briefly, and if there was any regret about that, or was there some acceptance in the choice that you ultimately made?
So let's backtrack a little bit. I was not born in India. It was actually my grandparents who were born in the same village as Gandhi, and they came on the boats from India to South Africa because they were looking for a better land. So my parents are first generation South African. They think they're coming to a land that's going to be better, and then they find out that it's all apartheid, it's not peachy, so they get involved. From Gandhi to Nelson Mandela, now we're in the anti-apartheid movement. So, being activists has been in our blood. And so my dad raised me, and the most fundamental lesson he taught us was, Fatima, you only have two things in your life. You have your faith and you have your knowledge. Everything else they can take from you.
That's
okay?
Right. That's right.
All you have is your faith and your knowledge. That's yours. You get to keep it or you get to give it away.
Amen.
So my dad, having three daughters, and because of apartheid, we would never be able to have post-secondary education. He immigrated to Canada because Canada is a Commonwealth country like South Africa. And so when my parents decided to go back to South Africa, because now we had our education, we could go to school, I decided that, I was going to go kicking and screaming. So the first guy who said, let's get married, I was like, I'm in. Okay. And it was like, there was just this desire inside of me. I couldn't see myself in South Africa. The mentality was small and I couldn't understand it at that time, Marjorie. But you know what? There was a calling. I needed to be in Canada. So even after I got married and I had my divorce, I ran. It took 10 years to actually get officially divorced. But staying in Canada, choosing to raise my family here without my parents, without family, without anyone, the reason I stayed, I'll be honest with you, is because I have a child with cerebral palsy, spastic quadriplegic. And South Africa has a very small, tiny mentality, and they would feel pity for my child and pity for me. And that's the last thing I want, right? I want to raise him as if he was as normal as possible. And I raise my children and teaching them, not all of us can be Michael Jordan. So you pick your strengths and then you fight for those strengths, right? You came with the gifts that God gave you. We want to see it. Yeah. And don't focus on what your gaps are. Don't focus on what's not working. And so South Africa was not the answer for me. And I really honestly felt that Canada was the place that I would raise my kids, help them step into their brilliance, because I'm raising leaders, kind, compassionate, human
Mhm.
beings.
Beautiful.
And also, I have 4 boys. And for me, it was like the mothers are the ones that will raise the abusers. The mothers will be the ones that will raise kind, compassionate men who will treat their women with gentleness and love and compassion and kindness. And so I put it on myself to say it was my duty and responsibility to raise kind, compassionate men.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that. And I've seen pictures of your children. They're all beautiful.
Thank you.
You've written several books, and one of them that really caught my eye, and I think it really sort of encompasses your story, is about fearless faith.
Yeah.
And you write that you learned that your best lessons always have been taught when there's challenges and difficulties. So tell us, who was your greatest teacher and why?
My ex-husband, the one who perpetrated the most amount of violence upon me. And why was he my greatest teacher? Because I didn't know how strong I was until the tea bag gets put into the water. You don't get to see how weak or how strong that tea bag is until we are squeezed. And for me, it was a lesson of self-discipline. It was a lesson of love and a lesson of forgiveness. Can you actually find a way to forgive your perpetrator? And that's the lesson here.
Okay.
And so Nelson Mandela was put into solitary confinement for 27 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he learned to forgive his perpetrators. The Prophet Muhammad experienced so much pain. Jesus experienced so much pain. Moses. I look at these as my greatest teachers and say, if they could forgive the ones that hurt them the most, can't I?
Yeah.
And you know what, Marjorie? It was hard.
I was going to
tell
ask you that, Fatima.
It was hard because in my conversation as a believer, my conversation was God will judge. Okay, God will judge. There will be a judgment day. And all of that conversation is for every atom of good, we're going to be judged. For every atom of bad. Like I went through like 8 years of no child support, running, keeping my kids safe, no money. Between my welfare check and my son's disability check was how I could feed my children. And so in the midst of all of that and running for my life with 5 kids and a wheelchair while one is in college, you have to dig deep.
Yes.
Right? You have to dig deep. And so every day I would ask God and I would say, what does it look like to forgive? And I would go to bed like that. What does it look like? Because growing up, I learned a methodology. Forgiveness was forgive and forget. So that was in my programming.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to myself, that doesn't work for me. Man, it doesn't work for me. How am I going to forget what you did to me? And then as I get older, I'm searching. I'm on this quest of give me a new way. What does forgiveness really look like? And I found it, Marjorie. I found it. Okay. So this is what it looks like. Forgiveness means to me, I will never, ever forget what happened and what you did to me. And I no longer wish to handcuff myself to that pain.
Yes.
I am freeing myself.
Yes.
Okay? And it was out of pure selfishness. I no longer wanted to. And so I wanted to free me.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, because every single time I think about that situation, guess what? I'm reliving it.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, I'm losing my present and I'm losing my future because I keep talking about my past in that way. And so I was like, let it go, let it go, let it go. But then that wasn't good enough for me either. I wanted to up it a level. I started saying, God, what does it look like for me to bless them?
Woo!
Okay? Because I wanted to be so free of all of that.
Well, what does that look like to bless him, Fatima?
It looks like complete freedom now. So every night I go to bed and I say, okay, God, 98% of people die in their sleep. So if you choose to take me back tonight, because all of this, the heavens and the earth and everything in it is his.
Yes,
If
yes.
you choose to take me tonight, forgive my soul, look after my kids, keep them guided, and forgive and shower your blessings on my perpetrators, because they are also hurting little kids.
Yeah,
Whether they did it consciously or
yeah,
unconsciously,
yeah,
bless them,
yeah,
guide them, help them, because they are suffering also. So I
definitely.
needed to tap into their soul as servants of God rather than their actions.
That is such a beautiful thing. And you're right about the release, because when you started to talk about that, how it sort of freed you, first of all, and all of that. I remember as I was, and early on, this was like early on, like the first maybe 90 days, people were talking to me about forgiving. And I was like, please don't tell me how to forgive, when to forgive. It's going to be when I'm ready. I know when it's going to be time, and you can't force it. But there was something that when I knew that, Marjorie, you've got to let what happened go. You can't let it be a ball and chain in your life. You can't hold on to being a victim. But the biggest thing was that I realized in that process, Fatima, was that it was about forgiving myself, because that was the thing I was holding on to. It was like I had this unforgiveness with me first, and so I had to work some things out within myself then to be able to release him in that way. And
I agree with that
it is a hard,
100%.
yeah,
100% I agree, because we chose these people. We chose
yeah,
these humans for this experience.
choice.
And even though I'm an immortal soul that is going to live forever, I'm having a human experience right
No,
now with
mhm,
this human being right
yeah,
now. And
yeah,
so, yes, what does it look like for me to forgive myself for everything I said and didn't say? What
yeah.
does it look like for me to forgive myself for everything I did and didn't do? Because I, as an adult, chose this human,
Yes, yes, most
right?
definitely.
For
Yeah,
whatever experience and lesson there was. And so when I teach my women and my clients, I say, okay, what was that lesson you needed to learn?
yeah,
And
yeah.
extract the gems and extract the nuggets,
That's
and
it.
you will be so much better off with that.
Yes, 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 most definitely. Yeah. There's lessons in that. And so the forgiveness journey for everyone is going to take, however
Whatever
long.
time, whatever
Yeah.
time it takes.
Yeah, exactly. There's no time, so you don't have to force yourself to do that. But I will say this too, is when, and asking that question about who is your greatest teacher, and I knew you were going to probably say your ex-husband, and I can definitely say mine too, because I can stand here and tell people that even though what I went through was just so traumatic, that had I not gone through that, I would not be the woman that I am sitting here today. You would not be the woman that you are sitting here today, doing the work that you're doing in the world right now. That experience happened for you. So tell us about that work you're doing now in the world.
So what I'm doing right now is I have 2 global companies I run. And on the one side, on the umbrella, is the publishing side. We've helped more than 120 people become best-selling authors, and how to take your story and put it in a package, your messaging, your book becomes your business card, opens up doors and everything. And then we also do legacy books, right? How do you, when you expire this meat suit, leave back your traditions and your stories for the women and the sisters and the brothers that are following you?
Yes.
They get to read your story that is unedited, because I promise you, your cousins and nieces and nephews and kids and grandkids, they're going to give their version of your story. So why not you tell them your story, right? And let it be something where you get to model this behavior of resilience and faith for the future generations. And then on the other umbrella is our coach certification program.
Mhm.
So I help women take their pain, take all of their history, and turn it into purpose, power, and profit.
Beautiful.
How do you become this person to say, I'm not only going to forgive, but I'm going to use my pain as a springboard for success and package it and get paid for it?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow, right? It's like, yes, woman, yes. You know, Rumi said, don't get attached to your pain, because one day your pain will be your cure.
Yes.
My entire business is based on my pain. How
Yes.
cool is that?
Yes, that is beautiful. You and I do similar work because the same thing. I believe you take your pain and you use it as your platform. You flip that experience on its head and you use it for good in the world. So, I mean, I think that's the most beautiful thing that you can do with an experience like that. And you go from being this victim to survivor to now this thriver in the world and using that lesson in some way. I want to ask you one more question about how, you say in the book, all men are not created equal. Okay, so we can
That's
we
right.
can see evidence of that, right? So we don't have to get into all of that. But I do want to say, or we do want to ask you, as a Muslim woman, how have you experienced your story? Does it affect the way your story is accepted or received when you tell it and share it in the community?
Of course. You know, the people only listen, Marjorie, from their perspective. People can only listen from their filters. And it doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or atheist or just spiritual or not. Your filters, you're judging me from the moment you see me or see you, right? Look at the world today. Look at the divisions. Okay? I mean, look at it. And for me, I only see the common. When you're sad, you want to curl up and be alone. And when you're happy, you want to expand and be joyous. And so I get it. When people judge me, I have this thing inside of me. I just say, thank you for showing me who you really are.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Thank you. I got it. And I send you love. But I mean, when I wrote How to Be a Muslim Woman Divorced and Totally Confident, and it hit #1 in 24 hours, I knew there was a message there. Okay? And coming from a Muslim community, I choose to practice Islam as a faith. But I don't see Islam in people, because you know what? Your Islam and your Christianity is how you talk to the taxi driver.
Mm-hmm.
Is how you tip someone. Is how you talk to the doorman.
Yeah.
It's not how you pray.
Yeah,
I am
exactly.
so sorry. It is not how you act in church or when you take your shoes off and enter a mosque.
Yeah.
Okay? Your faith is how you walk and talk every single day. How you treat your wife, how you treat your husband, how you treat your worker, how you treat your client.
Amen.
Not just how you treat people who are going to pay you.
Exactly.
It's how you treat someone who doesn't serve you, or the street sweeper. That is who you are. Your faith is in your walking and talking.
Yes.
And so all men are not created equal. All women are not created equal. We are the sum accumulation of everything we want to absorb. The books we read, the people we surround ourselves, the TV we watch. If you're watching mainstream media only, you're of a certain kind.
Yes.
You're of a certain thinking.
Yes.
Okay. If you're only going to get your opinion from one source, you are that source. But if you bring yourself down and you meet, like Million Stars Academy is a coaching certification program we do. And my very first sentence is, it's for women internationally, regardless of race, religion, faith, ethnicity, or history. Come and bring your brokenness. Come and bring all of you, who you are in your brokenness, and you are welcome.
Yes. Yes.
That is faith.
Yes. That is beautiful. That is really, and we really have to start looking at each other through this lens of, brother and sister, and, you know, you and I are one, and just really seeing ourselves in one another. But there's just so much division right now. You're
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
If you choose division, that's what you'll see.
Yeah.
God is as we see him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you see him everywhere in everyone all the time, you are right. And
Yep.
if you don't see him, you are right.
Exactly. Preach. Oh, Fatima, that's why I love talking to you. This is beautiful.
We can talk until tomorrow.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us and sharing all of your wisdom. Please stick around in case we have any questions at the end of this segment, okay?
Such an honor. Thank
So
you,
at
Marjorie.
this point, guys, we are going into just a quick intermission before we go into the second segment. So I was going to have Francisco sort of check the pulse of the chat room, and but I can sort of see what's going on, and everybody is just flowing, and they're agreeing with everything that they're saying, and they're enjoying the panelist discussion so far. And what I'm getting out, and I took down some notes, is from these three women so far, we've heard about forgiveness, we've heard about faith, and we've heard about strength. Those are like the three defining things for them that help them push through and move through and rise from the ashes. But I want to take a moment to let you guys know that there's an opportunity for you to use your story and to make a difference. If you thought about the idea of a book or a keynote, a movement, or some kind of business, but you're not really sure, but you know there's something for you to give to the world that only you can offer because of your story and your experience, I want you to go to phoenixmoment.eventbrite.com, and I want you to register for a 2-hour workshop that I'm going to be doing where I'll work with you in developing what that next step is for you. So maybe if writing the book is the thing, we'll look at that part of that story. And I want to help you see how not just to tell your story, but to use your story for good. Now, there are only going to be 10 spots for this, and it's a week away. So I want you to make sure and go over there tonight if you can. Again, it's phoenixmoment.eventbrite.com, and you can register. I think Francisco will put the link in the chat box for you. And if that date doesn't work for you, if you're not available, there's also going to be a link to my calendar where you can go and schedule some one-on-one time with me. So we could spend some time together and talk about your story and what that looks like and what the next steps might be for you, okay? So let's go ahead and move on and keep it moving. We're already an hour in, and we've got the gentleman. And this will not disappoint. My next guest, this is another guy. You know, I've had a chance to get to know him, and he has a rich history. And I won't dare go into his and tell his history because I was already a little off with Fatima's, so I will be off with his. But I will tell you that Byron Fogan is what he would consider a grateful recovering alcoholic and a compulsive gambler. He took his last drink about 7 years ago, and he spends his time today working on his own recovery and sharing his experience with others who seek to find a solution to their problems with addiction. Byron was a practicing attorney and public relations consultant for a number of years in Washington, D.C. His own personal plunge into the depths of substance abuse and the process of cleaning it all up took him to some dark and unfriendly places, including suspension from the practice of law and a short stay in federal prison. But that history of fall and recovery has blessed him by pointing him in this new direction, a life where he helps and advocates for returning citizens and those struggling with addiction. I want to welcome Byron. So, Byron, your story. When I think about your story, yours is more about this self-inflicting wound that you gave yourself, and so when it's like that, when the trauma and the pain that we suffer in our life is sort of self-inflicting. It can take on a different meaning, and there's this different process of growth and healing for us. So I want to talk about the guilt that you may or may not have felt. But does guilt become an obstacle in your recovery, especially for someone with a substance abuse issue? And if guilt was, if that was an obstacle for you, how did you address it?
So, number one, thank you. I'm happy to have this opportunity. It's so great to be with you. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. And, the way I look at my life, I had a series of shame-based social choices that came long before I got into recovery, right? Like the story of addiction is kind of a series of shame-based social choices, right? Like when I first started drinking and I first started using, I thought it was fun, right? Nobody around me used the way I did. Nobody around me drank the way I did. I thought it was fun. Until I started to recognize how different and how abnormal it was from my peers. And then you just start hiding. So you're talking about guilt and shame. Like the guilt and shame started long before the actual problem started, right? The guilt and shame started that first time I had a blackout and didn't really know what I did. The guilt and shame started the first time I lied to my parents about what I was doing, or had to break up with a girlfriend in high school because if I stuck around her too long, she'd know I drank like a pig. And then started choosing, instead of to be around healthy people, started choosing to be around people who were equally as unhealthy as I was. It started long before I ever found anything that even resembled recovery, right? And it's the guilt and shame of the previous night. It's the guilt and shame of the hangover. It's the guilt and shame of the promises unkept. The guilt and shame of the lies. The guilt and shame of kind of the degrading situations you put yourself in. And
it's really, on a daily basis, then.
Daily basis.
Yeah.
It's I talk about towards the end of my drinking, like every day I woke up and said I wouldn't do it. And by noon or 2 o'clock, I was already drunk or already high or already gambling. And that was, I drank and used that way for 27 years.
So I know this wasn't a question that I had for you that I, pre-approved, but I wanted to ask you, do you, or would you want to share with us what you feel was one of the root causes, or issues that the reason why you drank and abused alcohol the way that you did?
So I'm going to be careful because I really don't talk about I talk about the process of being in recovery, but I don't really talk about how. Okay. I understand addiction as a disease, right? And I understand it as a disease because I don't try to look at the causes and conditions of what made me an alcoholic, right? I do some work on that, obviously, within the program of recovery, but believing that it's a disease, I like the effects produced by alcohol. And when I drank alcohol, I liked it. And then when I didn't drink about it, I obsessed about it, right? My disease tells me I don't have a disease. All these different types of things that have to do with the disease process of addiction. But the reason I kept on using in spite of the problems is something I can absolutely talk about, because I kept using it in spite of the problems because I didn't like myself very much. I was super afraid that if you got to know who I was, that you wouldn't like me. That if you got to know who I was, you'd find out I was a fraud, like that I didn't deserve to go to law school, that I didn't deserve to go to a good college, that somehow I didn't deserve to be married. Like, I hated me so much. I was so scared that people were going to find out what I was inside.
Wow.
built this whole edifice around me to make sure you never found that out.
And you were masking that with the drinking.
Right.
Because you get to be someone else.
Other addiction, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want anybody to know.
Yeah.
So that's why I continue to use in spite of the problems, which is an easier conversation to have than the disease process of addiction.
Yeah, of course. Okay. All right. So let's talk about that. You know, when we talk about the phoenix rising, before the phoenix rises from the ashes, there's a burning. There's a crash and burn that happens. So what was that for you?
It got to a place where literally I couldn't wake up and leave my house without becoming law enforcement involved. I went from being a pretty well-respected attorney and a pretty well-respected lobbyist and public affairs official to someone who literally could not walk out of my house without coming into severe conflict with other human beings. I was anti-socially drunk almost all the time. And if I wasn't anti-socially drunk, I was angry that I wasn't anti-socially drunk, and I was running into conflict with others, right? I ran into conflict with my family. I ran into conflict with my job. I stopped showing up for things that I was supposed to show up for. Things like depositions that I was supposed to be taking. Things like appearances before federal magistrates that I was supposed to be doing on behalf of my clients. I found myself in a position where if I wasn't drinking and if I wasn't using, I was in conflict with other people. Then if I was drinking and I was using, I was in conflict with other people.
Yes.
And unfortunately, law enforcement found their way into my life quite often, even though I wasn't beating people up or anything like that.
Right.
I was a menace. I became a menace. And so during my spiral towards my bottom, I just kind of burned down every relationship that I had. Again, violence, it was because of absence. It was because I didn't want to be around people who would require me to be sober.
Yeah. You weren't showing up for others. You weren't showing up for yourself.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I stopped caring about myself. I was hopeful towards the end that I would just drink myself to death.
Yeah.
Because I was too scared to kill myself. I thought that would hurt.
Yeah. Wow.
My greatest hope was that one day I would just drink myself to death, and then that would be over, and I would stop hurting the people I cared about and stop hurting myself.
Because at that point, that was the only out that you could see for yourself.
That was the only out I saw. That was the only out that I saw. So
tell us, what was your Phoenix moment? So you crashed and burned, of course. You spent some time, small amount of time in federal prison. You came out.
Right.
You made some choices. So what is that? What was that for you? What was that defining moment for you?
So it's interesting because my defining moment, I got sober 2.5 years before I had to start facing the consequences of my life in recovery. Right.
Okay.
So I got sober, and a lot of people will talk about getting sober or getting clean, and all of a sudden everything gets better. What happened to me is that I got sober and everything got worse. And the reason it got worse is that for the first time in 27 years, I started paying attention to the wreckage that I caused around me. I had never paid attention to it, not once in my adult life. And I got sober, and suddenly my eyes were opened to the problems that I created for myself, the people I love, and for the community around me.
Yeah.
So my Phoenix moment was actually a couple of days into recovery. I was in a detox, and there finally was somebody who looked at me and said, it doesn't have to be like this anymore. There was another man who showed up on time. He did everything I didn't do. He was a man's man. He showed up when he said he was going to show up. He was happy, and I was sad all the time. He could smile. He treated women appropriately. He did everything that I did not do. And he looked at me and he told me, it didn't have to be that way anymore. And I just started a journey where I decided to just follow his lead. And I started following other people's lead who were like him, who had found recovery, found a God of their understanding, and started doing things differently. And my Phoenix moment rose me through the garbage of cleaning up the wreckage of my past. By the time I went to prison, it was almost like, hey, this is just another badge to put on my chest. That's part of me putting my past behind me. It wasn't, I didn't like it, but it wasn't something where I was like, oh my God. Blah, blah, blah. No, it was just another piece of me putting my past behind me.
So this was going to be another part of the process of you healing and of this learning all these lessons. This is just another step in that. So you do your time and you were able to come out.
Right.
And now tell us about the work you're doing in the world.
So it took me a long time, and one of the previous ladies who spoke talked about like it taking a long time to talk about it. I think it was Demi. It took me a long time to be able to acknowledge to the world that I had been disbarred and I was in prison. It was not something that I could do easily. It certainly wasn't supposed to be part of my narrative, but it was. And once I started talking about it, I found I couldn't shut up. A lot of people who I expected a lot of people to look down on me and to denigrate my experience, and I didn't want that. Instead, what I found is a lot of people who were interested, they were curious, they were going through their own struggle and addiction. They went through their own struggle in incarceration, whether it be 24 hours like you described, or whether it be a much period of time. And we are hiding. We were all hiding. And it wasn't helping any of us. So I decided that the strength of my story is to be able to share it, that it does me no good to keep my story inside, but to share it with others in the hope that, number one, it's going to keep me clear, keep me honest, keep open about my process and how God has blessed me, but also as an aside, not as the primary purpose, but as an aside, help another person. Help another person understand the same thing that man once told me, which was, whatever you're going through, it doesn't have to be that way anymore, and it can start today. You don't have to wait 4 weeks in order to start your recovery. You don't have to wait 4 years to start your recovery. You don't have to get to prison to start your recovery. You can start your recovery right now. We can start together with one another.
Yeah. So now you're showing up.
Right. I'm on time. I showed up for you on time.
That's awesome.
That's everything.
So tell us about the the work that you're doing, the organization and the people that you work with.
So I started an organization called FIRM, which is formerly Incarcerating and Recovering Men. And one of the things that I try to do is talk to men who are coming out of prison or who have been out of prison and who have felt like they've lost their way. Try to start developing some kind of training or some kind of relationship building between one another so that we can point each other into jobs, or we can help each other kind of form entrepreneurial guilds, like the old style guilds where we are supporting one another and helping each other get the message out about their businesses, and really just acting as a sounding board for one another. There's a choice that you can make when you get incarcerated. There's a choice. You get to either continue to live life the way you used to, or you can change, right? And all the men that I work with and I speak with, we all made a decision long before we got out of prison that we were going to change. We didn't want to go back to what we were doing before, but some of us don't know how to achieve that. So together we discover how to achieve that. I also have, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's beautiful. I love that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I also have a platform under which I share my story in recovery. And the biggest thing that I focus on is that recovery is fun, right? I don't talk about how I got recovery. There's a lot of different ways to find recovery. I found one. I found a God of my understanding who loves me and wants good things for me. That's great. But the emphasis for sober shit is like recovery is fun.
Mm-hmm.
Recovery is great.
Yeah.
Like I thought before I quit drinking and ripping and running that life was going to be miserable. And in fact, it's quite the opposite.
Yeah.
My life is so much more fun today.
Yeah.
I do things I never would have expected.
Yeah.
I started motorcycles again, like at 43 years old, and now I can get off of them, right? Like I have fun, I have relationships, I have friendships with men, which was something I didn't do. I didn't trust guys.
Right.
I have friendships with people like you.
Yeah.
I also meet people because I'm painfully introverted. So like life is just awesome. And I try to talk about that and share those stories either through writing or through posts. And I have a consultancy where I try to help attorneys who may find themselves in the kinds of problems I found myself in. And hopefully we can get to them before they start screwing up their life and mitigate the risks of addiction to their practice.
You know what I hear, Byron? I hear a man that now loves himself. Before, there was this part of you that you didn't like.
Right.
And now you have embraced you, love you for who you are. And a part of that too, I think, is because you're now serving others. And that's how we can find real fulfillment in life, is when we start to serve others. We start to pour into other people. And this work in particular, especially with those that have been incarcerated, is so important because you come out as a felon and you are rejected in a lot of different ways. It is so difficult. Starting a business is a great, a lot of them do. They have to start their own business to make their own way. And so they need that support, but also just for them coming out of a community of being incarcerated where you're supposed to be for rehabilitation, but it's really not. It's a system and it's a place that will break a man.
Right.
And he comes out even more broken. Right. And so you are offering this safe space for them to come and be whole again. And so I love that. And yeah, I'm proud of you. That's great. That's
Thank
great.
you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So thank you so much for agreeing to come on and share your story with us. And if you could in the chat, share your organization, the acronym again, and where they can find you in case there's someone out there who, has someone that they want to, put in contact with you.
Okay. I sure will.
All right. Much. Awesome. So, oh my God. See, guys, this is good stuff. We got 2 more to go. And I told you the men were not going to, disappoint. All of these stories have just been, it's so empowering. And now you see why I chose these particular people, because they have got something really great to share with you all. About the experiences that they've gone through and how they have been able to overcome them. So this next guest, a lot of these people I've just like newly met, and I feel like I've known them forever. But this guy, he feels like an old friend. Kevin McLemore, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. Kevin's story is one that started off as a child in poverty in Dayton, Ohio. He's one of 13 children with a mother that was absent from his life from the time that he was 3 years old. Kevin would tell you that he learned everything he'd ever need to know about life by playing high school football. But he was also told that he had ADD and ADHD. But he was also told that life rewards actions. Your actions will either make your life or your actions will cost you your life. And in his book, The Indispensable Game of X's and O's, He writes to reach out to people from all walks of life who feel a sense of hopelessness and they're looking for some kind of a sign that there is help for them. Kevin is best known as a motivator. By reputation, he's constantly reinventing himself to his environment and is consistently delivering his message both to young and old to believe that anything in life is possible as long as you have great vision and willing to put in the hard work. Kevin, welcome to the show. So your book is compelling. And just in the little bit that I have read, I love how you write. And I love how you were able to tell your story and weave in some historical context of growing up Black in the inner city, the issues of the Black family. You share a wealth of wisdom between your father and grandfather. Not many of us have people in our lives that will pour into our lives in that way. Even as much to remember half of the stuff they're going to tell us. But, I can see in you that you kept those words close to your heart and they were your foundation so that whenever you got lost, you knew what to come back to. In your book, you talk about being a young man and the Kevin you exhibited in public and the one in your head didn't sync. They're like two people operating at cross purposes, sharing one mind. So you seem to be in conflict with yourself. Tell us what that conflict was and why.
Well, first, let me say, I want to say thank you for the opportunity. I am following some terrific people. I was almost speechless listening to some of their conversations, and I'm honored and privileged. And for the people that we have that knows us personally that tuned in, I want to say thank you. The other thing I wanted to say, you mentioned that I grew up poor. I didn't know I was poor. So the one thing I learned very early on from my grandfather, there is a physical you that's in your environment, and then there's a mental you. Never did I know until I got to college and I had a rich roommate that I was poor. So I never had poor thoughts. And, the fact is, when you look at the fact of growing up in a dysfunctional family, my mother made a choice that I don't know if I could have made when I had children, but she made the best choice for her. So I'm very proud of my mother, even though it wasn't the decision that I would have made for mine. But it takes a very good big person to realize that there's a life that they need to lead, and they made choices. And my father, he had made some choices that weren't popular with me, but the one thing he did, and I think this is very positive, especially in the Black community, that a man needs to stay around to show his sons what it's like to be a man. Mm-hmm. So all the characteristics that weren't exactly the characteristics that I adopted, he showed me what I didn't want to be. But the one thing is, my father was a beautiful man. He had a great big smile and everyone loved him. He had a great sense of humor. So no matter what people talked about his shortcomings, all I looked at is his strengths. And that strength gave me the ability to become the person I was. Now, when you talk about the choices and me being at crossroads, I grew up very angry. When I came home in the third grade and found out that my mother had moved to Beverly Hills 90210 and my father had got custody of us, and shortly after, not being able to pay his mortgage, moved us in to his childhood home, my grandparents. But my father put me in a great place. Put me in a great place where there was wisdom, there was love. My grandparents were wonderful. I had a great group of brothers and sisters that, although that we grew up in poverty, we didn't know we were poor. We had love. And that's one thing when you look at the foundation that you build on, when you build a foundation of what you can do versus what you don't have, life is great. And the turning point when I talk about the crossroads is that in my household, I was Kevin McLemore, brother to Dwayne, Dwight, Daria, Raymond, Anthony, Teresa, and I can go on. But when I hung out with my friends, I was Kevin McLemore in the streets. And when I was transferred from the summer of my 8th grade year, I had defended the honor of a young man in my neighborhood that had been beaten up and robbed on his paper route. And then several weeks later, after retaliating, giving our version of street justice, went to one of those parties. You know, the parties, I don't know if you remember, when you went down to the basement, the lights were turned down low and so forth, and you stood in the back doing your little thing, whatever, trying to get the attention of Vanessa Birdsong, the cutest girl at our high school at that time. Came down the steps, a couple of guys that, you know, had bad intentions. These were the guys you normally didn't invite to a party, but they showed up.
Mm.
And with them was the one guy that we had challenged, that we had given our version of street justice, pulled up his chest to mine, I put up to his. He pushed and I pushed him back. Someone broke us up and asked us to take it outside, and we were all ready. Put it up. That's the way we used to do in the streets. Unbeknownst to me, they pulled out guns and knives. And luckily for me, my childhood friend Paul Moore and I decided we were going to take off running, zigzagging through. We hopped over the public school fence. And, you know, this is also in my book, lay down in the girls' bathroom. And all I can remember is the pop and feeling the cement falling out around us. Understanding that we had no way out, I decided the only way we were going to get out, I'm not going to stand here and wait for them to climb the fence and find us. I decided to exit. Paul followed me right behind. But I discovered two things about myself. And we'll all get to these crossroads every now and then when we make a decision to go right, left, or just there. I found out two things. One, I had world-class speed because I outran Paul. And I promised myself if I can get home without any bullets, I was going to change my life. And part of changing my life was changing surroundings and people that I was surrounded with. And that gave me an opportunity when I got to high school, is sitting in a gym class with our coach Russo. That little short guy had a very short, thick accent. When he asked how many of the young men were going to play freshman football, I watched all the other young men raise up their hand, you know, like they were going to play football. I had never played football in my life. I never watched it. I grew up in a baseball home. And then I gazed into the eyes of another pretty girl, Pam Jones, light skin, beautiful hair, light brown eyes, whatever. She looked over at me, and all I can think of, she goes, "Oh yeah, they're playing football." And little did I know, my hand just raised right up. And the surprising thing is, I went 2 weeks of going to football practice, never showed up for one practice. Came home and made the biggest mistake of my life. Told my dad I played football. Little did I know 2 weeks afterwards that I was supposed to come home dirty. My father decided with his best friend, because his best friend's son played football, to give me a ride to football practice. Two things my parents didn't allow in the house: liars and thieves. Okay. I'm going to tell you, you know, and one thing I didn't want to do is find out how my father really felt about a liar. So when he dropped me down at Grace A. Green, just before the car rolled to a stop, I was already out running, ran down the hill. Coach Russo looked at me. I said, "Mr. Russo," and my dad found out that I lied to him, he would kill me. I told him I was on the football team. Coach Russo looked up the hill because Grace A. Green sat in a little valley. My father looked at him, and I know to this very day, my father knew I was lying. Coach Russo knew I had lied to my father, but somehow back then they connected. Coach Russo waved to my father, told me go over there and run with the rest of the boys. Changed my life. I became dedicated, commitment to my work. So when you talk about being at a crossroad, the crossroad will take you away from your dream. Yeah. And then there's a crossroad that will take you to your dream.
That's so true. That is so true.
Big.
And that's how you were introduced into playing football.
I knew nothing about football, I will tell you.
And changed your life. Wow. Wow.
That was smart.
Oh, wow. So let me ask you then about, because I know you had met, and we talked before, and we talked about, you know, different Phoenix moments that you've had in your life. Why don't you share with us one of those, or one or two of those Phoenix moments in your life?
Well, this is going to sound strange. Where I'm at today, and with this book, I knew from the third grade on that I was going to be in this moment right now. I knew one day I was going to have this interview and talking about this book. Okay, from the third grade on, my whole life has been following this path. Some days I was on, some days I was off. But the one Phoenix moment that I had when I was 35 years of age, my mother came back into my life. I had spent my whole entire childhood life, my adult life, telling everyone my mother was dead, because that's how I dealt with not wanting to become a statistic. I didn't want to become another Black African-American child that came from a broken home. So it was easy for me to say she was not in existence. And it was easier for me to cope with the fact that I came from a broken home. Well, when my mother showed back up, the reality came back in that I had lied to a lot of people that I cared about. And one of the things is, like, again, liars and thieves weren't accepted. And I was a liar, okay, and had to come to terms with that. My father died 10 years ago. And when my mother came back in my life, my brothers and sisters all reconnected with her. And at that time, I had started a family of my own. And I just said, you know, right then, I didn't need a mother. But when my father died, I looked at my brothers and sisters gathered around my mother. You know, she had lost her ex. My mother still loved my father, even though they had been divorced for I don't know how many years. But I asked myself two things. I said, I can either wait till I'm standing over her coffin and cry crocodile tears for a woman I didn't know, or get to know the woman that I knew today. And my mother was a dynamic person. She marched with Martin Luther King, started a company called Action Incorporated to do the civil rights movement. So now you know the conversation that you and I've had about what's going on.
Yeah.
And she was a dynamic woman. So I've got her blood in me. And so I decided every Sunday we're going to talk after church. And I would call and I would have surface conversation. At the end of the conversation, she would always say, love you. So I went into a personal situation when I didn't know if I was in or out. And I called my mother on Saturday. Called her, we were talking, whatever. She gave me some great sound advice. I needed my mom. I felt like a little 8-year-old kid wanting to talk to my mom. And again, my mother said, you know, I loved her. She loved me. And I said, mm-hmm. And she goes, it never fails, sweetheart. You always seem to throw a sucker punch at me. And that hit me hard. And I thought about it. And I said, you know something? I love you too. So I'm sitting in a parking lot. I called home to my better half and I told her what had happened. I said, just got off the phone talking to my mother. And she goes, okay, why are you calling her? It's a Saturday. And I said, I needed to talk. I said, I didn't know if I wanted to stay in this relationship or not. And she gave me some sound advice. And she goes, well, what's the big deal? And I said, my mother said she loves me. And she goes, your mother always says she loves me. And I said, but I loved her. And she goes, what's wrong with that? I said, this time I meant it.
Wow, look at that.
And I've got a great relationship with my mother. Great relationship.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
And that's why I said, you know, as individuals, we spend our whole life hanging on to crap that doesn't even matter. We hold on to bad relationships where people don't even realize that they've got so much power and control over you. You can't move forward if you're constantly looking backwards. That's the reason why the mirror in your car, in the reverse, is smaller. Your opportunity is out here.
There. Yes, yes. I love that. Let me ask you, okay, so you said even at the age of 3, you knew that you were going to have this interview. You knew you were going to write this book. So at the age of 3, you had a vision, you had a dream, you felt this inner knowing, like your life was going to be bigger and that you were going to affect a lot of people. And I can relate with that because I've got to tell you, when I was young, my dream was that I was going to be a television newscaster. Like I was going to be the one delivering the news at 6 o'clock in the evening, right? But here it is. This is what I'm doing, right? I knew that I wanted to use my voice, right? And I knew that I wanted to tell stories. I didn't know when, but I knew that I was supposed to be on camera and I was supposed to be doing it. And it's something about that. If we go back, and that's one of the exercises I love to do with people when we talk about your story. If we go back to when you were a little child, what was that thing inside you that you just felt, you just knew you were going to do? And somehow, some way that will show up. That shows up in your life in some way, shape, or form. So this book, which I'm telling you guys have to get, this book is good. I haven't had a chance to read all of it, but just from what I've read, I'm loving your story. Why this particular book at this time, Kevin?
Well, believe it or not, I work at a very upscale health club called Lifetime Athletics. March 2nd, 2019, I got struck in the head with a barbell and suffered a severe concussion. I spent 2 weeks in recovery, not being able to have sound, light, or anything else. The one day I was left to my own being, I went to my computer, and it was almost like it was already set up for me. Normally I had to make a couple clicks, enter my password, open up my computer, and the document said Kevin Stuff. Open it up. The first document at the top of it was everything I need to learn about life. I learned high school football. It was my high school journal from 1973 to 2019. Every significant event in my life. And like I said, my memory for 2 weeks, I had nothing. I couldn't remember who was in my household, whatever. I was frightened of everyone. That was in that journal. I went through and I started writing it. And I came back and I asked someone, who wrote this? Someone told me it was me. I said, this is my story. So without this book, my memory, what little bit of memory I have, I wouldn't have had. I did not know until I was that I had ADHD, and I was diagnosed at the age of 50. I went through my whole childhood, almost made it through college, and went to a great university, Central State University, great, one of the top 9 Black universities, and almost graduated from college, not being able to correctly read or write.
Wow.
Okay, but one of the things that I knew I could do, I can tell a story like no one else. Okay,
Yes, sir.
that's the reason why I said from the 3rd grade on, my Uncle Bill, my grandfather, my cousin Ronnie, everyone kept telling me when I did stuff, you had greatness within you. We got to go out and get the world ready for you. I've told each of my children the same thing from the day that they came into this world, and I delivered one of them, that they had greatness. I had to go out and prepare the world for them. This book is my coming out card to every 6th grader, 7th grader, 8th grader that's preparing to enter high school and preparing for their life after high school. It's a map of saying you can live your life with excuses, or you can live your life creating experiences and memories that are for other people to follow.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, I love it. I love it. Definitely want to get this book. There's so much nuggets and of wisdom inside of it, and I'm so glad that we had a chance to connect, Kevin, because I definitely want to get you on for an hour by yourself and really talk about the book and dissect it, because there's something there for everyone. And our lived experiences, just as we've been saying with all the other guests, it's about sharing those experiences with others. Everything that you've gone through from the time you were 3 years old and everything, it's like it's a combination of experiences for you now to share and put in a book to impart to people, and that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
And part of this, and this is going to follow with the next young man that's following me. My grandfather used to always say he doesn't mind giving you a hand, but he won't haul you around for the rest of your life. Which is, you look on my Facebook page, I say reach one, teach one. Yeah. I'm actually helping Raymond write his book. I was actually glad I went before him, because the brother is so dynamic. I did not want to follow him, because a lot of times when I'm talking to him, I had to open my eyes to see if I was talking to myself, because even though he's a great educator, yeah, he's a great friend. So for those of you that are my friends that are not going to hang around, you need to hang around to see this brother.
Definitely. Thank you. That's a great segue. Thank you for helping me with the introduction for our final guest this evening. Really, yes. Last but certainly not least, in this whole event is Ray Porch. I connected Kevin and Ray because it was like they were living in parallel universes. Ray grew up in Columbia Heights Projects in Boston. Ray thought that basketball was going to be his out, but there was always something or someone in the way of the success he really wanted. And sometimes that someone was himself. He knew he wanted better, but like Kevin, was in conflict with himself at times and didn't always choose better. Ray is a student of humanity and freedom, a K-12 educator that's committed to the co-construction of excellent learning environments, communities, and cultures, environments that support and facilitate freedom. His skills and passion flourish and add value in spaces where knowledge and awareness are a priority, where co-constructing socially, emotionally, and academically equitable environments are paramount. Today, Ray uses his passion, professional skills, and life experience to lead and shape K through 12 school experiences for students and educators alike. Ray, I want to welcome you to the show. There's feedback.
Thank you so much.
Okay. You have to mute when I'm talking. Mute your mic when I'm talking. Okay. So, Ray, you and I had a really enriching conversation about the educational system and how systemic racism is within the educational system and how it can really be harmful for our children, the Black children. And, you know, we talk about the opportunities for our Black children are usually attached to sports of some kind, right? It's usually like their way out. And you know this oh too well from your own experience. But there's always something else that's fighting for their attention as well. They're trying to get out of it. They're using sports, you know, and there's something else that's fighting for their attention to keep them there. What are some of those things that was fighting for your attention and kept you sort of, all right, so one part of the question is, what are some of the things that was fighting for your attention? And then the other part of the question is, what kept you connected and engaged between wanting more and actually doing more? Unmute.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes,
first,
I got you.
I wanted to say thank you so much, Marjorie, for the opportunity. And I also wanted to speak directly to my fellow panelists. I wasn't aware of the stories that were shared tonight and the great detail they were shared. And I just want to recognize and commend each of you for your courage and your great commitment to self-development and also, you know, humanity, you know, to share your story and talk about what you've experienced and to use that fuel, you know, to fuel what you do next and what you're doing and all the great work that's happening is amazing. I'm inspired by it, and I feel and I'm glad I'm last, but I feel like you know, like not worthy in a lot of ways because those scenarios are very, very powerful scenarios. Resilience is a word that I don't throw around, but you folks are tremendously resilient folks, and I am I'm deeply grateful and humbled to be able to have heard and learned and look forward to learning more about what you do and how you do it and ways that I can contribute to your work. But that said, my story is a little different, and to answer your question, I think for me, growing up in housing development in the projects, being the youngest of 8 children, you know, and my mother was on AFDC, you know, supports, welfare supports, and I went to the public schools right across the street from Columbia Point, and you know, I saw a lot of things that, you know, that someone who's young or a child shouldn't have to see or experience in my neighborhood, in my community, and later those things would fuel who I became, and so I'm grateful for those things as an adult. But I think the thing that kept me engaged and committed to wanting more and surviving my circumstance was I had people who spoke into my life. And I had basketball. You know, you spoke to it. It was a game that really helped me grow up. It was present for me a lot of times in my life when, you know, people always weren't. I had older brothers and sisters who, you know, went into the service and weren't around. And, you know, my neighborhood was a tough one. And lots of drugs, you know, lots of violence. It was on an island, Columbia Point. If anybody's familiar with the Boston area, Columbia Point's an island, so it was often thought of as a place where it was one way in and one way out. And I was fortunate enough to be involved in basketball, and I met a gentleman named Lewis Bryant, who gave me an opportunity to attend an elite private school. on a basketball scholarship. And so this was a great opportunity and a highly motivating opportunity for me because it gave me a chance to get out of my environment and get exposure in another environment. But it was also one that was a challenge because here I was living in Columbia Point Projects and commuting every day to an elite private school where kids my age were driving to school in cars and they had money and all of the like. So there was kind of living in two different worlds, and that was the part that was a challenge. So on one hand, you were learning a lot about what existed beyond your scope, your experience, and on the other hand, you were starting to see some of the deficits and some of the inequity in the way that you lived in the world. So that was one of those moments that, you know, I think for me created some cognitive dissonance. So here I was going to the school, really wanting to excel because I wanted to go to college and I wanted to play basketball. And then I was going home every day to a neighborhood where some of my friends and some of the young people I came up with saw me differently now because they were like, hey, you're a prep school kid now. And so it was a pull and a juxtapose, you know, experience in a lot of ways.
Okay. So, yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. Every time I talk, you'll have to mute, and then when you talk, I'll mute. So let me ask you, because you said something about the people in your life. So what key person was in your life that really was there to encourage you? Because we know how important that support circle is, especially for young children, right? And especially for our young people. And you know, and you talked about having, you know, you're in two different worlds. So you're on one side of the track, and then you have to come home to the other side of the track. And we know that environment plays a big part in the choices and the behavior and even just how we see the world, right? And so, you know, you're leaving one place and you're going to another, and now you're in conflict with both of those. So you said that there were certain people in your life that really sort of helped to keep you on the right track. Who was that person for you?
Well, I think the person that was the most helpful as I think back was Lewis Bryant. And I highlight Lewis for a specific reason. I had multiple people who played a hand in my life. And I always say this to young people now, there will always be people to talk to you and to try to give you advice. There's lots of good information in the world. Your choice becomes the one of whether or not you want to take the time to listen. And so I was fortunate, I had lots of people who spoke to me. And I always say it was like candy, like the now or later candy, right? You get the candy now and, you know, you reap the benefits of it later. But like for me, Lewis, I point at, you know, as being a specific person because what I learned about my life and who I would become was a byproduct of getting that opportunity to go to Brown and Nichols. And while my success there wasn't what I wanted it to be in terms of the social acceptance and you know, I was dealing with the race dynamics and all those other pieces and the academic change, and that I was an honor roll student in public school and I went to a private school and I ended up on academic probation. I was really great student to I'm not good enough student. So all of those pieces happened, but I mentioned the benefit of that circumstance because had I not had that opportunity, it would not have served me later on in my life. And so I would have never known there were places like Brown and Nichols. I would have never known there were environments like that. There were kids who were like me whose socioeconomic circumstances were vastly different than mine. I was exposed to so many things that really benefited me later on in life. There was a struggle, you know, in the present, so I didn't appreciate the opportunity and take advantage of it like some of my classmates did. You know, because I was battling this, being in the projects and then going to this private school, and my focus being on basketball, not so much on always academics. I didn't make good choices all the time, and so I share that because later in life, the losses in those situations and not achieving in those situations were things that I reflected on deeply. And had I never had the opportunity, I would have not had the opportunity to be able to reflect and learn. Because I don't think you lose in life, I think you learn in life. And I would have never had that experience without that opportunity that Lewis provided for me.
And that you said that, that you don't lose in life, you learn in life. That's a quote. Somebody needs to type that in the chat. Most definitely. I had another question, but there was so much going on as you were talking in my head. Let me ask you about a defining moment for you, that you decided, right? So you can be in conflict with, knowing you want more, but actually doing what you need to do to have more. What was that defining moment for you? What was that Phoenix?
So I thought a lot about this, and so I went to Division II school in called American International College in Springfield, on basketball scholarship. And my freshman year, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. The first bout, she ended up battling cancer multiple times, and I ended up transferring home. And so when I got home, I recognized how much things had changed, but how much I had changed. And it was a rough time, with my family because, my older sisters, and my older sister had moved to Maine, and my older brothers were away from the house. And so there I was, kind of trying to figure things out and feeling a little depressed, feeling a little down about having to come home, and things haven't changed so much. I just felt, like I kind of an outsider, and trying to find my way again. And it was like starting all over again. And so for me, as I thought about, where I was and all I had gone through, in my life at that point, there was this pull to do different. And so I went to UMass Boston, and I took school a lot more seriously. And, I played basketball there, and really grew a lot, as a young man, because I started to think about life beyond the game of basketball. And I could then learn more and appreciate those experiences with a lot more value. When I was chasing basketball and being all about basketball, then, it kind of limited my scope and my vision about who I wanted to be as a man. This played a big part in who I became later on, in terms of like getting into education, and being a college coach. And I thought about all those young men that, like Lewis Bryant and others who played a part in my life, that the things that I learned from them were bigger than basketball. Basketball was a game that I would play for a short period of time, no matter what level I got to. Even if I went to the NBA, my time there would be fleeting. It would be immensely shorter than the time that I am a man, and the time that I'm, a student or a son or a friend or a husband. And so I started to understand those things because of the adversity in my life. And I started to be able to appreciate all the things that I had gone through, and started to apply some of those learnings in my life. And so when I started coaching, it wasn't about basketball. It's a game. I have great love for the game, and it showed me the world. I got to travel to other parts of the world, China, Germany, other places, playing the game and coaching the game. But what I learned the most was that basketball helped me grow as a person. I learned life. And so my goal as a coach and as an educator was to teach life through the vehicle that benefited me so much, and that was the game. And so with all the, junior college players and high school players that I've coached, on the international side that I've coached, and I always try to focus on one essential question with players as I come in contact with them and young people. And that question is, who are you? It's a continuum. When you ask that question, there is no one easy answer. And so that became my great passion, and it still is to this day, to kind of learn from and build with, all that I come in contact with. And it serves me as a husband of 23 years come September 13th, and I've got a 21-year-old daughter. And so it's been a great benefit to me.
So you answered my next question about, because I was going to ask you about You know, when I asked everyone about one word that would describe your experience and your story, you said essential. And so you sort of explained why this experience you had was essential in becoming the man that you are today. And so I want to talk briefly about the work you're now doing, right? Because of this, I guess you're a coach, but you are also an educator, and you're going into the educational system differently than most teachers are. You have a goal in mind, and I want you to share a little bit about how all of that you went through, how that plays into who you are as an educator.
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you. So right now I'm in school leadership in a public school in Boston, a K-8 school in Boston called the Joseph Lee School. And I'm fortunate enough to work with two really great school leaders as well, alongside two other great school leaders as well. And my work is primarily focused on assuring that in public schools we have what's called a perceived achievement gap. And essentially what that amounts to is Black and brown students across the country in public school structures don't achieve at the same rate academically as our white counterparts. And so I'm also, a doctoral candidate, and so some of my research is predicated in this idea of school constructs and school bills and school design. And my focus at present in the work that I do is to assure that our educators understand that our young people that dominate to the percentage of about 80% Black and Latino in our school district can't always see themselves in the 75+% of white female educators that are in front of them, and that has an impact. Engagement, in my mind, is the sole foundation for all learning. And so if a person is engaged, emotionally engaged, with curiosity or some level of emotional feeling and connection, then the opportunity for creating fertile ground for learning and exchanging ideas and for risk taking is going to be foundationally greater. And I don't think that the education construct that we all came through in colleges and universities across this country and high schools always acknowledge that. I talk a lot with our leadership team about the difference between adaptive work and technical work. Technical work is like schedules and curriculum, instructional practices, lesson plans, these kinds of things. And it's not to say those things are not important, because they're essential. But without engagement, those things fall upon deaf ears. There's a saying that we use in education. Students don't care what you know until they know that you care. And so my work is really focused on assuring that our educators understand the ways in which they create engagement, the ways in which they affect students' experiences holistically, and how that impacts the learning opportunity and the instructional practice at the school level. And it's also working with leadership, because oftentimes we have school leaders in our district who are also, not appropriately in terms of the diversity element. They don't look like our students as well. And it's important for our young people to see themselves in all the experiences, which is why tonight has been powerful. We've got authors, not just people who survive circumstances, but we've got authors, we've got business owners. And right now, as many of my colleagues have talked about, around our society, we're seeing this shift, this paradigm shift happening. And I think it's essential in schools that we recognize the importance that our young people see themselves in these experiences, in these spaces. A lot of my work is also built on, changing the resources, right? And Kevin spoke about the work that he's doing. And one of my goals is to utilize his book in my middle school next year as a supplement for our English language curriculum, which is not curriculum that I'm fond of, but we're going to heavily supplement so that it is representative of our young people and their experiences. But yeah, that's the work that I do. It's the work that I'm passionate about. And again, it's in all my efforts. It's about having that dialogue and co-constructing with families, with educators, with students. And to me, transparency is about the truth. And sometimes that's a little uncomfortable, but I think that it's a necessary space if we're going to create a vision for our young people that they can aspire to and feel proud of in the future.
This is amazing. It's, you know, how your life has just come full circle with all of the experiences that you've had growing up with the educational system, with sports, and how you've just sort of integrated that into the way you're giving back. You know, giving back through, you know, with coaching in basketball, giving back in serving as an educator in this way. And someone like you really needs to be traveling around the country and really teaching this philosophy to other educators, because it's a big thing to be able to sort of dismantle the educational system that we have. We know it's a broken system. But I think if we could get to the teachers themselves and the leadership with, you know, within the schools, even there, and try to get some of this philosophy in there, it could make a difference. We could start somewhere. And I would like to have you join a conversation. I host an event called Storytime and Wine, and we've been talking about stories about being Black in America, racial reconciliation, different things like that. And we're going to be talking about the educational system and how it is very unbalanced, and some of the things that we can do when we look at systemic racism. Where are the areas that we can focus on to make a difference and start to make changes? Education is one of those areas. So I would definitely like to have you on to sort of be a part of leading that conversation as well. I appreciate you, Ray, and I thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and just, you know, all of this wisdom with us this evening. Thank you so much. So guys, we have gone over our time, and we've had some powerful stories here tonight, and we've just scratched the surface. I will say this: I don't think we're going to have any Q&A tonight. We won't be able to do that. If there are any questions, the panelists will be able to look at the comments after the event, because the video will stay up. And you guys can go on there after the event and have conversations, share information. But, you know, as I think, when I think about all these stories, I want to say this, that if we see ourselves as victims, we resign ourselves to fear and ultimately failure. If we see others as the perpetrators, the oppressor, the abuser, the villain in our story, we extinguish all hope. But if we can see ourselves as the hero in our own stories, we can become catalysts for change. I truly believe this. This is why I want to invite you guys again. Please, if you have an opportunity tonight, go ahead and register for the Phoenix Moment workshop at phoenixmoment.eventbrite.com starting next week. If you want to use your story and your voice to be the change you want to see in the world through your book, through your movement, your business, whatever it is, I invite you to join us. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of my guests. I don't know if there's a way that we can bring them all on screen, Francisco. If they're all muted, can we bring them all up on screen? Is everybody? I think we lost Lisa. We might have lost her. But listen, guys, I want to thank you all so much for sharing your story, sharing all of the lessons that you've learned, and just sharing this space with me tonight. It was truly an honor for me as well, and I could not have done this event without you. Please take time to go through the comments, and if there's anyone that you want to connect with otherwise, you can definitely do that. I want to thank Francisco Barreto, who's behind the scenes. He's our technical producer, for, you know, making sure everybody's names are spelled correctly and, you know, handling all the technology in the background. I want to thank you, the audience, for sharing this time with us, sticking it out for a little over 2 hours for this event. I will be doing these events more often. They will not be 2 hours, but this was a kickoff to a series that I'm going to be doing and eventually roll into a podcast. And then I just want to give one more shout out to our sponsor, Jamar Jennings. Remember, if you are interested in solar at no cost, please contact Jamar at 215-791-2442. Thank you all for joining us and have a good night.